So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, everybody here in the room. Enjoy the food. It's an excellent spread, as you might have noticed, and also the people online, which is quite a substantial number of people online. My name is Klaus Stoll. I'm the Managing Director of the Global Knowledge Partnership Foundation, which is the organization responsible for the Pathfinder initiative. And I just want to use this for 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to talk a little bit about Pathfinder, and then we are going into the full program. Some months ago, during a Pathfinder event, somebody said Pathfinder is not an initiative, Pathfinder is a movement. And in a way, that is right. Because what we are trying to do is, we all use the internet, everybody is using the internet, but nobody is quite aware about how it works, how it operates, how is it controlled, how the policies are dominated. So basically, we are trying to take over the thing we are actually using. And the key to that one is quite simply awareness and capacity building. And we are doing now since 2.5 years events around the globe on Pathfinder, just simply doing nothing else, no politics, no policies, just simply trying to build up capacity and build awareness. And this is the first one of 3 events here in Washington, D.C. Then there will be a second one in January and in February, and throughout the US and in other countries we will have much more to offer in the next 2 to 3 months. What I wanted to say, one other thing about Pathfinder, it is a little bit different from other initiatives or movements. It's very participatory, and what I want to ask you is, if you are listening and if you're coming to the Pathfinder events, please feel free to think about how you can participate. If you want to speak, if you have an idea what is really burning on your thing. It's not that we say you have to listen to that and that. No, we want to hear from you, and we want to participate, want you to participate in Pathfinder. So there are, for example, regular planning events for Pathfinder. And you don't have to be in DC, you just simply hear about it, we send out the information, connect remotely. So, for example, we just had one event a week ago or so at ICANN, and it worked quite well for this event, to prepare this event, and that was working quite nicely. So that brings me to the last part, which is normally the most boring part, but actually this is the part I like, because I want to thank, first of all, Mayor Brown, not only for this room, but all this wonderful spread and catering, and especially to Brian Winterfeld, who made all this possible, and also the assistance of a lot of people here in the room and outside. Please, the person who's calling me at the moment, I'm not free. The other people I wanted to use, everybody's leaving the room, and I want to say thank you to them, is first of all ISOC Chapter DC. They did a marvelous job in supporting us in everything we are doing there, and I can tell you Pathfinder is sometimes a fairly complicated thing, and I want to mention in particular 2 people. One is David Fjost, who's left the room, and the other one is sitting in the corner, which is Paul Brickner, who, as usually, doesn't say much, but does the most of us all. And there is a unique way you can thank Paul for what he's doing since many years. It's go to your ISOC chapter and tell him this is a guy they should vote into the ISOC board. A hand of applause, please. Thank you. Last but not least, I would like also to thank ICANN for being basically a sounding board, a support role. We have Joe helping with the room, other people helping with advice, and that's wonderful. So if I could find David, I could actually start moving over to the presentations, but David is not in the room. So it's usually missing. Otherwise, I just start Who's going first? Courtney? Yeah. Oh, okay. I think we should go ahead. Yeah. David disappeared, so you have to bear with me, and I have to actually read it from a piece of paper. We start with Courtney Radsch from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Courtney C. Radsch, PhD, is a journalist, researcher, and free expression advocate. She previously worked for UNESCO Section for Freedom of Expression and a senior program manager for the Global Freedom of Expression campaign at Freedom House, where she led advocacy mission to more than a dozen countries. She has also worked for Al Arabiya in Dubai, the Daily Star in Lebanon, and New York Times. Follow her on Twitter. And the details are on that page. So thank you very much, and here you are, Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much. My name, like you said, is Courtney Radsch. I'm the Advocacy Director at the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a pretty self-explanatory name, but it is one of the country's oldest leading press freedom organizations, and we work on behalf of journalists around the world to protect them and advocate on their behalf, because as you probably know, the past 3 years have been the worst on record for journalists, with record numbers imprisoned and jailed around the world. Now you might be wondering, why is somebody from the Committee to Protect Journalists speaking at the inaugural Internet Policy Forum about privacy and security? And I think the reason is that NGOs like ours are working on these issues as fundamental to the people that we protect and work on behalf of. It's critical both to our work as an NGO as well as to the people we protect. So I actually wanted to start with a short overview video about Raqqa is being slaughtered silently. I don't know if you read the recent New Yorker article about them or have heard anything about them, but they're operating out of the so-called Islamic State's so-called capital of Raqqa at great, grave personal risk to bring information to the world. Obviously, the ability to receive and impart information is not only a human right, but it's incredibly important to these people to get information that is an alternative reality to what is being seen that ISIS is trying to get out on social media. So I want to play this video because it shows the actual people who we are protecting around the world and who are depending on encryption technologies, on technologies that can ensure that they communicate safely. So I'm going to try to see if this works.
It was like any city in the world. We used to go schools, to the gardens. It was a really normal life. After ISIS came and changed it to the Black City, the Ghost City, we can't live there. We tried to fight with our cameras, with our pens. The situation in Syria forced us to be media men.
Raqqa is being slaughtered silently. They are the only persistent, challenging media organization inside Syria who face only not just brutality and oppression from the Islamic State, but also from the Syrian regime.
So many media outlets use the information, use the videos that this organization is putting out.
Our group inside, they are taking photos, videos, and our team outside publish it in our social networks and our website.
One of the things they try to illustrate is how bad things are there, how severe the punishments are that ISIS administers, the executions, the beatings.
Unfortunately, that's what happened with one of our reporters. They found his laptop and our campaign logo that they executed him in a public square in Raqqa.
More than 84 journalists have been killed because of their work in Syria over the last 3 years. And we have documented the largest number of journalists forced into exile. We are giving this award to this media group is because they are the most vulnerable, because they don't have the resources or the preparation and the training that international journalists have.
All of us are students. All of us lost our studies, lost our life, and we don't know in any time we will be killed or what will happen to us. I'm doing these things only for my city, hoping that one day we will back and live there.
So I feel like this video illustrates the great personal risk that journalists around the world are taking, and especially in places like Syria. ISIS has made it virtually impossible to get information out of its so-called capital, as you've heard. And this young man and other members of Raqqa being slaughtered silently were in DC and New York last week. 2 weeks ago to receive the International Press Freedom Award and to talk with technology firms and to talk with government officials about how they can stay safe. They depend on encrypted communication to get their messages out. They depend on satellite internet because there are cars that drive by, that ISIS drives by to pick up Wi-Fi signals. They're illegal to have modems. They go into internet cafes and check all of the traffic that has been which websites have been visited, what information has been downloaded. You have to register in order to use internet cafes with your ID so that they can find you if they don't like something you've seen or written. And if you have visited an Raqqa being slaughtered silently, that can be grounds for murder, for killing. There was one of the Raqqas being slaughtered silent journalists who got stopped at a checkpoint with a computer that had one of their logos on it, wasn't secured. He was beheaded in a public square, as you heard in the video. So I know this is dire, but I want to emphasize that these things that we talk about here in Washington in policy fora and discussions about encryption backdoors, and when we talk about them in the US context, they have broad international repercussions. Journalism plays an essential role in realizing democratic and developmental rights, and it serves a societal interest in transparency. So wherever they take place, acts of journalism are involving enormous risks to journalists and to sources, and this is especially true when journalists challenge power. And many NGOs, not just those working with journalists, but those working with human rights activists, with social justice activists, domestically and internationally, are playing a critical role. And encryption and anonymity tools help journalists and activists improve their security and privacy and help them to mitigate or prevent some of the threats and attacks, as well as to provide better protection for their sources. So whenever a journalist checks their email or communicates with a source, their privacy depends on encryption. So as my colleague, CPJ technologist Tom Lowenthal has explained, a journalist's smartphone contains work in progress, a Rolodex of contacts and all manner of in-progress conversations and messages. So purloining it would give unparalleled insight into a journalist's work, including the sort of details a reporter might risk jail time trying to protect. And indeed, last year we documented 221 journalists in jail for their work, many of those on anti-state charges like anti-terrorism. And in Turkey, there is a journalist now with Vice News who's been in jail for more than 100 days because he has encrypted data on his computer. The Zone 9 bloggers, if you heard of them in Ethiopia, this group of bloggers use their blog to write about social justice, human rights, to challenge corruption and censorship and promote democracy. Now, Ethiopia, being one of the most censored countries and a leading jailer of journalists, was not happy about this, so they charged the bloggers with terrorism and aggressively prosecuted them for participating in email encryption training. So simply the participation in a training, I'm sure many of you know Security in a Box, was used as evidence that they were part of a anti-state movement. In Kazakhstan, they will next month reportedly implement a system that will require internet users in the country to install a backdoor into pretty much any internet-connected communications device, which will enable the government to spy on all communications, encrypted communications. The new communications law reportedly requires installation of a so-called national security certificate on the device, which allows the government to act as a man in the middle. So that the state-owned internet service provider, which issues this certificate, will have access to all user requests and incoming and outgoing data. So this could enable the government to censor or block websites or even tamper with the contents of messages. I'm pretty sure none of us want our government to be the man in the middle in our communications. Imagine if you live in Kazakhstan. And frankly, as ISIS is horrible in Syria, but Syria's Assad regime has also been horrible. Their surveillance of telecommunications, from cell phones to internet traffic to text messages, has been extensive, and it's used equipment that is built in the West by companies such as Blue Coat and others that you've heard of to censor the internet, to block websites, to snoop on traffic using deep packet inspection. Eva Galperin of EFF, who you might know, also reported for CPJ that Syrian government has benefited from intelligence gathered by pro-Syrian government hackers targeting Syrian activists, including journalists and their sources, with malware that can capture webcam activity, disable the notification settings for certain antivirus programs, record keystrokes, and steal passwords. In 2011, Syrian security agents arrested a British journalist and filmmaker named Sean McAllister, and he seized his laptop, cell phone camera, and footage for a documentary that he was making. And it revealed, among other things, the identities of several dissidents he had interviewed on camera while in the country. When the dissidents heard that McAllister had been arrested, many of them fled the country to avoid physical harm or arrest, but several others were arrested. So these technologies that keep people anonymous, that allow us to communicate in an encrypted way, are really important for journalists and for activists around the world. A man-in-the-middle attack can also be used for censorship or misinformation, which is another dynamic of what we're facing. The secure HTTPS protocol for websites normally makes censorship either an all or nothing affair. And since it's encrypted, it's difficult for a censor to see which page a user is trying to reach or to selectively block some pages. But a man-in-the-middle attack with a false credential can get around these restrictions, and we saw this happen in China when the certificate agency gave a false certificate. And this has real implications, because then you can't trust the information that you're getting. And these false credentials enable these man-in-the-middle attacks. So a journalist might think that they're logging into their email, or when they're actually sending their password to someone who means them harm. So from our perspective as an NGO that works on press freedom, but more broadly freedom of expression and human rights, encryption, privacy, and anonymity are enablers to the right of freedom of expression. And thus any restriction on these tools, on encryption, privacy, or anonymity, must conform with the same standards under international law that are imposed for legitimate grounds, such as it has to be provided for by law, it needs to be imposed legitimately, and it needs to be necessary and proportionate. And so this means that restrictions on encryption or anonymity are especially likely to fail the third prong, because blanket prohibitions fail to be necessary and proportionate, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Privacy. Why does this matter? Well, in part because the US efforts to weaken encryption undermine efforts around the world and provide normative justification to regimes for what they want to do. And they argue that they too should have backdoors, because they also have national security interests. It also means that US journalists now have to contend with threats previously faced only by journalists operating in the most repressive regimes, such as protecting themselves from unnecessary government snooping, as well as from hostile hackers and foreign agents who want to exploit these weaknesses. And this is a real issue. We've seen China pressuring the relatives of journalists who are outspoken, not just critical, but covering issues that are of enormous, tremendous global importance, but that the government would rather not have out and about. So one of the things that CPJ has been doing is focusing on how can we default protection standards. So one program we have is called Securing the Newsroom, where we have gotten together journalists, media organizations, and technology companies to talk about how you can default security. So HTTPS, for example, the move by Facebook to include PGP keys in a field in Facebook so that there's more secure communication enabled. How can we make sure that all of the news sites, you might think, oh, I don't care, if my New York Times, is HTTP or HTTPS, but you should care, because then if it's not HTTPS, everyone can see what pages you're visiting, where you're going, and that can have serious problems, hopefully not here, but certainly abroad, in some of these more repressive countries. So we have to think about how do we default these sort of security approaches so that they're as easy to use and require the minimal effort by users. And I think that's one really important thing that NGOs bring to this conversation, because most NGOs are pretty small, under-resourced, not enough people working there, people who are doing many, many jobs. And so if we can, we're talking about what we can do for journalists, but we can also think about what we should do for NGOs more broadly. Another thing that we've been working with is Cloudflare, which has a project Galileo, which can be used by news organizations and journalists around the world to help protect themselves against DDoS attacks. I spoke with one Russian editor of a website in Russia, which is one of the only independent news sites left there, and he said they basically get constant DDoS attacks all day, every day. It's just now built into the structure of their work. Similarly, the Rakas being slaughtered silently folks were also talking about how they have been they've been hacked, their accounts have been hacked, their Twitter account was hacked, they've been the subject of DDoS attacks as well, and so how can we work with these journalists and these media organizations to get verified accounts, to take protections, get under the umbrella of organizations that can help them stay more secure and prevent these sort of attacks. Things like dual-factor authentication. We had Yubico keys given out at the Securing the Newsroom event that we had, so that we can figure out how, just an easy way to make sure that nobody can intercept these communications. So a report, as I mentioned, by the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression has described in detail how these encryption backdoors and weak encryption standards and the holding of encryption keys in escrow are deeply problematic, and concluded that they essentially can never be used on a mass basis, and they need to be done on a case-by-case situation. And the same with surveillance, again, that we've seen mass surveillance holds enormous problems, and journalists are a particularly vulnerable population, as are NGOs more generally, who are working on contentious issues, social justice, etc. So for journalists to work safely, they must be able to protect themselves and their sources, and this is why encryption is such a vital tool, and why the subversion of encryption standards, or even talk about wanting to subvert them, harms journalism. And CPJ believes that efforts aimed at the criminalization of protecting the right to private communication and association must not be allowed. So we're delighted to help kick off this inaugural Internet Policy Forum, and with that, I'd like to conclude and open up for any questions. Do you want to hand around the mic?
No, you keep that.
Okay.
Hi. So I'm just curious. Has CPJ what kind of I don't want to say grade necessarily, but how well has CPJ been able to lobby against the kinds of measures that we're seeing in terms of, encryption backdoors and weak encryption standards that you were just talking about? Like, how successful is CPJ? Maybe, I don't know, Sunlight Foundation or any other organizations that are involved in this kind of work. How successful have they been in lobbying against that kind of stuff?
So we don't do lobbying, just to clarify. We do advocacy. So in general, we're advocating against undermining encryption backdoors. And I think that It's definitely become harder in the wake of Charlie Hebdo and then the more recent attacks in Paris as well. But I think that seeing the administration, say that they are not going to advocate for encryption backdoors is a gain. There's a petition going around that is sponsored by several organizations, including endorsed by CPJ, that's calling on the government not to impose encryption backdoors. We work as part of a broad coalition on these issues, but we've held meetings with the Department of Justice, NSC, at Congress to raise essentially concerns about what I talked about here and why you can't look at this as a US only issue, right? Encryption either works or it doesn't. There's no such thing as a backdoor, and often the argument is made that you should use the front door, use a subpoena. There are existing mechanisms to get in the so-called front door. So I think that we have been somewhat successful, but it's far, far too early to declare victory because, again, every time there's an attack, you see this response. Even when, for example, many of the people who were involved in the attacks in Paris were already on the radar. So it really did not appear to be an issue of, surveillance not being known. Or in the San Bernardino case, I understand that there was posting on Twitter. Well, these are not encrypted communications, right? So, we are trying to really focus on emphasizing why encryption is critical to enabling freedom of expression, which is a right that the U.S. holds dear in its First Amendment. It is also part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, both of which the U.S. is signatory to, but with reservations. And so I think we've been somewhat successful, and the issue, I think we have to separate this idea that you can either have national security or you can have free expression, and the fact is that protection of freedom of expression will enable our national security. And maybe, do you want to introduce yourself also?
Sure. Well,
Sure. I'm Jared DeAngelis. I'm a technology consultant in DC.
so my name is Jim Galvin with Affilius Technologies, and I agree absolutely. Encryption is sort of the core technology, and one builds, all of your security on top of that. I'm wondering if you've given any thought to the next step down the road, and the one thing that comes after that, and the thing which jumps out at me, when you start talking about encryption and those kinds of technologies, you immediately run into the key management problem. Okay, as soon as you try to do this at any kind of level and scale, and you're nodding, so I'm assuming that you are aware of that. And what comes to my mind in that space is when you look for solutions to that, you begin to think about DNSSEC and DANE technologies, and I'm wondering if you have at all given any thought to those, and you're thinking about that as part of your promotion of encryption. Are you thinking about that key management problem and adding those technologies alongside of your encryption technologies that you're pushing forward with?
That's a great question, and I have to say I don't know, because I am not working on the very technical aspects of what we do. But one thing that I think is illustrative of maybe the broader question, which is you asked, looking forward to the next level. And so one of the things CPJ did a few years ago is create an internet advocacy program, which since then we've renamed the technology program to be broader than just the internet. But even at that point, when we created this program and created this position of someone really focused on these issues, it was to get out in front and to understand also the specific dynamics of how new developments affect journalists and affect the population that we're trying to protect. So I don't know the answer to your question. I apologize, but I would be happy to find out and get back to you.
Hi, my name is Patrick, and I'm currently a freelance writer, but formerly of the New America Foundation. My question is, obviously the video you showed talking about the need for operational security training for journalists internationally is clear and present. I think everyone can understand that. Has CPJ done a lot of work in terms of working with journalists domestically here in the United States, where maybe it's not quite as life-threateningly a pressing issue, but that there's still, I would assume, a need and maybe a different kind of threat model? So I was wondering if you can speak to anything on that.
Sure. So we did for the first, so we're primarily an international press freedom organization, but in 2013, the revelations about mass surveillance and the unprecedented use of the Espionage Act against whistleblowers, and a kind of a broad array of things happening domestically under the Obama administration prompted us for the first time ever to do a report on the situation for journalists here in the U.S., written by Len Downey Jr. And what it found is, really distressing situation for press freedom, the closure of the information space, the attempt to control information, the very negative impact of surveillance on journalists. And since then, there have been many reports that have similarly continued to find this for journalists. There was an ACLU Human Rights Watch report that also emphasized the harm caused to journalists and lawyers by mass surveillance and by undermining of encryption, and other groups who have documented this. So yes, we don't do training per se. What we do is advocacy and reporting. So we report on how these issues affect journalists, and that's one of the things that our staff technologists and technology program do is, for example, when there were security flaws found in TrueCrypt, they analyzed it to say, okay, well, what do journalists need to do given these security flaws? Or, how do you make it really easy for a journalist to understand what a PGP, how to install it in their email, or identifying, why should we care that Apple iOS just, became encrypted and that sort of thing. So we report on that, and then we do advocacy in terms of with governments. So we have definitely been focused. Again, we had high-level White House meetings where we raised the concerns from the Obama and the press report. And we also had a petition called the Right to Report campaign, and that focused on trying to get a presidential directive to prohibit the surveillance of journalists, and especially situations at the border, where borders are essentially lawless zones, where a lot more surveillance and you're kind of in a rights-free zone oftentimes. And we discussed those issues with the White House. We've raised our concerns also in Congress and with the NSC, and it's an ongoing dialogue, sometimes monologue. But the other thing is that the United States, it's not just the journalists in the U.S., but it's also the broader implications that U.S. policy has for journalists everywhere. And of course, so many journalists work, across borders. And you might be a U.S. journalist reporting on Syria. I mean, one very interesting thing that a Brookings study found recently, there's this big debate about countering violent extremism online. So they're talking about, I think Hillary Clinton just called for, social media firms to police content and remove that content. And of course, foreign ministers in Europe have called for the same thing. But what they found is that in a network analysis of ISIS accounts, is journalists show up in there. Why? Because they're reporting on them. So a lot of the journalistic activities that people do, talking to terrorists, going to locations where, extremists are, reading content, reading the bomb-making manual or whatever it is. These journalistic activities are being used as evidence of terrorism or extremism or, other anti-state charges. Not so much in the U.S., but certainly abroad. So thank you for your question.
My name is Roger Cochetti. I work with investors in the technology sector. And as Americans, although your perspective is clearly global, as Americans, we have to deal with the policy debate that takes place in the United States. So in that context, it seemed to me it would be helpful if you could comment on some of the claims or allegations or points that are often made in the context of the U.S. debate, just to hear how you respond to them. One of which is, I think two or three come to my mind. One of which is that if we only had a legal mandate and the full cooperation of the technology sector, we could create technology backdoor technology, which would only be accessible to right-minded people with Western democratic values. Another of which is, if you want me to find a needle in a haystack, I have to have access to the whole haystack. And the third of which probably is, if you want to respond to terrorists or bad guys of whatever sort you're going after, that's fine, we'll let disasters happen, and then you could pick up the pieces. If you want to prevent them, you have to intercede ahead of time through surveillance techniques such as the sort that you've been describing. So if you could tell us how you comment on those three. They're clearly in the context of the American policy debate, but nonetheless important for all of us as Americans. Thank you.
So in terms of CPJ's position, we try to really focus on how these policies implicate and impact a specific population of people. One thing that lets us do is look at, real cases and real implications instead of just talking in the abstract, which can be helpful. In terms of, this idea that, let's create backdoors only for the good guys, et cetera, we have done a lot of reporting that shows that is simply impossible. It cannot be done. You either have a backdoor that anyone can potentially get into, or you don't, right? So it's either encrypted or it's not. So part of it is that public education to journalists so that they can better report on these issues, because obviously they're a key interlocutor. Not only are they affected by these policies, but they're also the ones explaining them to the public. And in terms of, the needle in the haystack and that whole argument, arguably the needle is harder to find in a bigger haystack. And we've seen that journalists are being caught up as needles. You'll remember that the U.S. imprisoned Sami al-Hajj of Al Jazeera in Guantanamo for, I think it was 5 years. I don't remember the exact details off the top of my head, but he's now the head of Al Jazeera's Human Rights and Civil Liberties Department. So, it's I think that it's really hard to believe that argument. And just personally, again, because CPJ focuses on the journalistic element, but personally, what I look at, I lived in France on Oberkampf, right by where the attacks happened, and my understanding of the attacks here and in France is that everyone was already known, that those people were already under surveillance, and so the idea that we need to put more people under surveillance just beggars, disbelief. And frankly, if you think about what is the goal of terrorism, right, ultimately isn't it to create terror? And part of doing that is to destroy the social fabric. And so one of our, most important values as Americans is our First Amendment, right, the right to freedom of speech. And you can't enjoy your right to freedom of speech if you don't believe that you can speak securely, that you can speak privately, that you can express your opinions. And so, that's how we respond. But typically CPJ really does focus on the journalists.
The last question, please. We have more time for question and answers at the end of the whole event. So keep your questions in mind.
All right, there you go. So I'm Bill Cunningham, Creative Investment Research. In terms of the freedom of speech standards that you seem to be pointing to, I'm wondering if you guys have looked at the NTIA-IANA stewardship transition. It's been our position, and David knows this, he and I have had this argument for a while, that transition is silly in light of the need to have these types of global standards put into place, and that there's no better organization to do that than somebody like an ICANN, which controls the top level domain allocation process. So don't know if there's been any talk about that.
So it's something that we have been following. We've taken part in some of these consultations happening in Washington at the Internet Governance Forum, et cetera. In terms of the specifics about the proposal, we are not getting into the weeds. But there are some principles that we think are very important, right? You have to protect the ability to freely express opinions, freely disseminate and impart information online. Anonymity, one aspect that comes into this transition is the idea of the WHOIS registry. Where is that going to end up being? Are you going to be able to register domain names, without having to provide real name information? That's really critical. The multi-stakeholder model is very important. We definitely do not support the idea that the internet should be governed solely by governments, and we think that that's quite dangerous. So the multi-stakeholder model seems to be a good alternative to that. The WSIS review that is underway right now, the current draft specifically recognizes the importance of human rights and freedom of expression, and that these are fundamental values that need to be upheld in the information society and in the internet governance realm. So we're, very supportive of that. But essentially, there have to be a certain set of principles that underscore any sort of agreement in terms of the transition, but in terms of getting into the exact details, we have not commented on that. But we're watching, and we do feel that it's important, and at some point, we would be happy to explicate how this would impact journalists and why journalists should care. I think that's another big issue is, you have a small number of journalists, I think especially in the tech industry, who are focused on this issue. But one of the things we want to help journalists understand is why internet governance actually matters, beyond the highly technical acronym-filled halls of, the UN or ICANN.
Thank you very much, Courtney. And this last question brings me also a little reminder. ICANN is actually presenting on the 20th of February, and we can discuss your topic then on the 20th of February in more detail. So, Robert, you take notes. What's coming up? Okay, now I would like to announce the next speaker, which is Dr. Katherine Albrecht, or Dr. Katherine Albrecht is an internationally known privacy researcher, consumer advocate, best-selling author, and national syndicated radio host. So you're very familiar with the voice. She is also senior executive with the private search engine Startpage and Xquick, and is on the team behind the new privacy protecting email program Startmail. Startmail's mission is to make email protection, security, and privacy available for everyone. Dr. Albrecht is a respected expert in the privacy area with a decade of experience as a researcher and activist. And I just would like also to add that what she's presenting, what she's talking about, is exactly what Pathfinder is about, practical solution for practical problems. Thank you.
Thank you. It was kind of neat to hear my name pronounced in real German. We just say Albrecht. Give me just a moment. And is this microphone working?
Yeah.
All right, so shall I give you back that one? Okay. All right, so it's lovely to be here, and I'm really glad that I'm following Courtney, because I think you raised a lot of questions, certainly about what the dangers are that people face, and I think the next obvious question is, so what do we do about it, whether we're journalists in the U.S. or protecting people in other countries? There are, in addition to government threats to people's security, we're actually very concerned about corporate threats to people's security, because the nature of the internet these days is that the internet is really based on capturing information. The reason companies like Facebook and Google have become multi-billion-dollar powerhouses is because they have found ways to dangle very delicious little worms on hooks in front of people and get people to bite and contribute lots of personal information. So I joined what was at that time Xquick, a small search engine in Europe back in 2009. And at that time we were doing about 65,000 searches a day. It was a little tiny search engine in the Netherlands. And as a radio host, I invited the CEO, Robert Beans, to come on my program because I had just begun to understand what Google was actually doing. That Google is not your best friend. They're not there to answer all your questions. They're not your mom. They're not the answer man in the sky. The reason they give you a window on every single computer as the homepage of most people's web browsers is so that 10, 20, 30 times a day, you will log into the global brain and tell them exactly what you're doing. Who cuts your hair, because let's face it, we don't use the phone book anymore, right? We just look up the phone numbers online. What you had for dinner last night, if you looked up the recipe for lamb chops, where you're going on vacation, what that rash was between your toes, pretty much everything. And when Google found that its search engine was not providing enough information, they came up with lots of really creative ways to get additional information. And this is why you have lots of free services like Google Calendar. It's lovely for Google to know what every single person who's using Google Calendar is doing at any given time. This also makes it a very tempting target for the NSA and the government, because if you've got Google knowing everything about everybody, then that's the place you want to go to find information. So when I first found this out, I wanted to just dump the internet and go live in the woods practically, because I thought, how are you going to use the internet if you can't use Google? And so this is why I invited Ixquick on my program. I said, this is fantastic. You guys don't store IP addresses. You don't make a record of anybody's searches, and you're providing a full access to the internet like Google. How come nobody knows about you in the US? And the answer was, well, because we're European. So I signed up and said, well, let's find out about it here. And so we're now up to 6 million searches a day, up from 65,000. One of the first things I did was suggest that the company probably needed an easier name for Americans, so we created the Startpage search engine. And just really quickly on search engines, the difference between Startpage and Ixquick is that Startpage actually returns real Google search results. So we're sort of a proxy in between your search and Google. So you go to the Startpage homepage, and if you just go to startpage.com on your device, you can see it. You type in your question. We submit your question to Google for you. We get the answers from Google, strip out all the tracking cookies, give them to you privately, and then we delete all records of your search. So we don't store IP addresses. We're based outside the US, so we're not under US jurisdiction, and we are third-party certified. So a couple of years back, actually it was back in 2004, long before I'd even heard of Startpage, as a privacy advocate, I signed a coalition document in 2004 protesting the launch of this brand new email service called Gmail. And the reason Gmail was so upsetting to us, and it was the ACLU and the FF and EPIC and all the usual suspects. And the reason we protested is because prior to 2004, email had always been private. So email was similar to the U.S. Postal Service. If you sent an email, you didn't expect your postal official to open up the email and copy its contents. So people who are old enough to remember Earthlink and Netcom and AOL and all those old email services, the big problem that we had prior to 2004 is that your email would always fill up. It would say your mailbox is full, delete some messages, or you try to deliver a message to somebody else and it would say it can't be delivered because their mailbox is full. So what Google did was they came up with this bright idea that it's really useful to know what everybody's thinking about 20 times a day, but how much more useful would it be to know what people are saying to one another? Because that's when the really juicy information gets transmitted. You don't tell Google much, you just ask it, but you tell other people a lot. So they decided to identified the pain point of email in 2004, which was storage space. And so they came out with 1 gigabyte of storage for free. And everybody said, oh, it's great, it's amazing. And as a result, we all shifted into putting our email behind Google's sort of, it's like the Trojan horse in reverse. We kind of put all of our stuff into their servers. And the reason we protested in 2004 is we said, this is the first time any internet company has been brazen enough to say, go ahead and give us all your information and we're going to use it, read it all, and do whatever we want with it. So as a result, for people who remember the Encyclopedia Britannica, A through Z took up a couple shelves in your school library. Well, imagine that times probably 5 or 10, and that's how much information Google has amassed on people who are using Gmail and the Google search engine, etc. If you could actually print it out, it would be massive. So about 3 years ago, after Startpage was really taking off, lots of people using the private search engine, we said the real problem that we're facing now is email. And so we created the Startmail search engine to help solve that problem. And now I'm going to talk about that. So first, let me start with the overview video. And how are we doing on volume? Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Startmail.
That's not
If you've
cool.
been using Outlook, Gmail, or Yahoo,
Switch it over. There we go. Well, it's just a 2-minute overview to introduce.
hello and welcome to Startmail. If you've been using Outlook, Gmail, or Yahoo, we've got news for you. Those free email services come at a high cost, your privacy. Did you read the fine print when you got that account? You agreed to let them open and read every message you send and receive, searching for keywords and details to add to your profile. They record every word, monitor who you write to, and even keep a copy of your attachments. That's right, no matter how personal the message, they're watching. If your bank statement goes to a Yahoo account, they keep a copy. How about medical records to that Outlook address? Now Microsoft has them. And that confidential business plan you sent through Gmail? Now it's in Google's hands. I know what you're thinking, yikes! But even if you delete those messages, they hang on to them. Once it's on their system, you lose all control. Yes, email really is a privacy nightmare, but Startmail is here to change all of that. When you use Startmail, only you and the person you write to can read your email. Our security is so tight, even we can't read your mail. Neither can your ISP, the snooping eyes of Big Brother, or the marketers who want to spam you with ads. And when you delete a message, it's gone forever. Even we can't get it back. We built Startmail from scratch using state-of-the-art technology, then added privacy features like PGP encryption, minimal logging, and a user vault. We've also added IMAP support, disposable email addresses, and more. But if you're not a techie, don't worry. Startmail is so simple, anyone can use it. Well, almost. Those other services claim to be free, but why would a huge corporation spend tons of money to give you a free email account? Because they want to read your mail. The value of an email account is less than $10 a month. Would you let them open your postal mail or bug your house for the price of a cup of coffee? I didn't think so. So dump the spy mail and switch to rock-solid secure Startmail. For just pennies a day, Startmail gets your email out of the spotlight and back in your own hands where it belongs. Email privacy is more important than ever before, and Startmail is here to help. Sign up to reserve your account today.
All right, so now let me take you through some of the features of Startmail so you can actually see how it works. And we were invited here by Paul Brigner, and I want to say thank you. Paul actually has a Startmail account. We've emailed back and forth, and he said, this is really fantastic. People need to know about it. All right. Thank you. All right. And can everybody hear me? Okay, terrific. All right, so this is the background that I had up. It's actually my wallpaper right now on my computer. And wouldn't it be nice if there actually were a button built into your keyboard that you could just press, so whenever you were doing something private or personal, you could just encrypt it and you wouldn't even have to think about it? Well, we tried to come as close to that as we could. And just a little background, back in 2000, I actually became a privacy advocate and a consumer advocate in 1999-2000. As I was working on my doctorate in consumer education at Harvard University, and I actually studied supermarket frequent shopper cards and the fact that people don't know they're collecting their privacy, they're collecting their personal data. And my husband, as a gift in 2000, got me an encrypted email account. He set up email encryption on my computer. My husband's a techie and a hacker kind of guy. And it took me 6 months to figure out how to use it, and I was so excited, and I went out and I contacted all my privacy colleagues, and I said, I have PGP now. Let's start writing PGP. And not a single one of them was willing to do it with me. So all my great dreams just went down the drain in 2000. So years later, when I was working with this great privacy company in the Netherlands, I said, you guys actually have the ability to build what it was that I wish I had in 2000. And so they actually rolled up their sleeves and built it. So it's awesome. And it's similar to this button. This is how I felt. And in fact, even Glenn Greenwald, who wrote the book No Place to Hide, he's the reporter who broke the Ed Snowden story, almost missed the story of a lifetime because Ed Snowden contacted him and said, I've got some smoking hot information for you, but I can't just email it to you. You need to set up this thing called PGP encryption. And as Glenn Greenwald writes in his book, he tried, he didn't understand it, he was sort of in this position. And it was Laura Poitras who actually managed to overcome that and do the PGP encryption to get the information from Ed Snowden. So this has always been the problem. In fact, we've been at a number of privacy conferences, and literally the people who should be promoting encryption are saying things like, I think encryption is just too impossible. Nobody's ever going to use it. We should probably think of something else. So the impossibility of encryption has been its number one problem. And we've actually built one-click, easy-to-use PGP encryption. This is a screenshot of an actual Startmail inbox. And you'll notice, I put the little red check mark there, but all you do is literally check the box, encrypt this email. So it's kind of like pushing the button. All right, I want to paint a couple of scenarios for you of how you might want to use Startmail. One example is if you have an accountant and the accountant says, I would like to get a copy, maybe it's a new accountant, they say, I need your last year's email, or excuse me, your last year's tax return. And if you send it, and then they hand you their business card, and it says aceaccounting@gmail.com. If you send, even if you're on a secure email, if you send your tax return to somebody else's Gmail account, Google will actually open it up It will strip out your name, your social security number, your annual income, all your deductions, all your personal financial information, and it will put it into the Encyclopedia Britannica it keeps on you. So they do this with all attachments. They do this with any phone number that you include in there. So if you have a friend with an unlisted phone number, well, it's not unlisted anymore now, Google has it. So all of your information is snagged. That's the purpose why they do it. And if you struggle to understand that, just realize that multi-billion-dollar corporations don't give you their products for free. So if they're giving it to you for free, they're gaining something from it. And actually, you're kind of the person paying the price for it. So in the case of, let me go over here and pull it up. Hopefully you can see it. So in the case where you want to send your tax return, and I actually pulled this up and my colleague was like gasping, did you put your tax return up there? The fact that you're gasping when you see an actual tax return on the screen should give you an indication of just how sensitive this information is. This is actually not my tax return. I got this off of Yale's website. It's a graduate school sample tax return. But it should kind of give you the cold chills to think that somebody might put their tax return out for public view. So what I can do in my Startmail account, let's hope it's still open here. So I'm going to log into my Pathfinder account. I think it's 480. Hang on one sec. There we go. Oh, where is it? There it is. So I just set up a trial account for today. And I'm going to show you how easy it is to use. This is the user vault opening up, so when you close your account, it's fully encrypted. It's actually encrypted in your own unique encryption space that can only be opened with your password when you log in. And then the disks that they sit on, the big platters in Europe, are themselves encrypted. So if someone were to come in with guns blazing, they'd have to decrypt the disk, decrypt your space, and then decrypt the individual emails inside of there. And given that any one email takes about 40 years to decrypt, and Ed Snowden has confirmed for us that the NSA has not figured out how to do that, that's a lot of protection. So this is a brand new Startmail account, and I'm going to go ahead and compose an email, and I'd like somebody in the room to volunteer to be my accountant. Does somebody have a smartphone that they can receive email on? You want to do it, Courtney? All right. All right, so Courtney, what is your email address? All right, and I'm going to pretend that you're a Gmail. I don't know what's... Okay, so I'm sending it basically to a Gmail address. And this is one of the issues that Google's been really smart about, is because they host your domain on top of theirs, you don't know when you're sending email to a Gmail account anymore. So you may be putting your information right into their hands and not even realize it because the person has their domain on top of it. All right, and now I'm going to call this my tax return confidential. All right, now Courtney, if you were my accountant, I would say to you, I want you to write this down and put it in my folder, my manila folder file, that my password is going to be secrecy, all right? And so now watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead and attach that file. All right, and there it goes. Yep, there it is attached. And now watch, I'm going to click this encrypt this email button and watch what happens. Because you are unknown to me and I don't have your PGP key and you're not on Startmail, it's going to ask me a secret question, and that's going to be our password. So what password did I give you? And it's not case sensitive. Okay. And now here's another cool feature. I can set it to self-destruct, kind of Maxwell Smart style. So if you're in a really dangerous part of the world and you're waiting for my email, I can literally cause it to self-destruct after 1 day and it will no longer be available. Or I can have it sit for up to 3 months. So I'm going to go ahead and have this self-destruct in 1 day, and I'm going to say, here is my private financial data. Now, when I send this to you and you check your CPJ email, what you're going to see is not this message, but a notification that someone using Startmail has sent you a message. And in that email, there's a link, and the link says, click this link to proceed. You click the link, and what we do is, through your browser, we establish a secure SSL connection with our servers in the Netherlands, where we've created a tiny little email account just for you that's completely encrypted. And then it asks you the question, you type in the password, which is secrecy, which you've written down, and now you have access to that attachment. And now it just went to you not through your email account at all. It actually went to you through an SSL connection on the web, and that's how you were able to download it. Yeah.
The browser that you're using, you have your own browser?
No, but browsers are set up to be able to manage an SSL secure connection. So when you make an SSL connection using HTTPS through Firefox or Safari or Internet Explorer, you have SSL encryption on top of that.
Right, but isn't Google and Microsoft capturing what's stuff through the browser?
Not if it's SSL encrypted, because otherwise all of your SSL encryption would be of no value. So that's sort of the That's the purpose of SSL encryption. So the next part I'm going to show you is the PGP encryption, which protects you even from that. So even if someone were able to actually decrypt that SSL stream that we were transferring the information through the web, the email itself would be encrypted, and I'll show you that next. So what Courtney's seeing now is she actually has an interface that looks just kind of like this, and it allows her to hit reply to my email in that secure encrypted space on a server in the Netherlands. She can write back to me, I can write back to her. We can have a whole months-long correspondence, and it's the equivalent of my having given Courtney her own private Startmail account for the duration of our communication. So it allows, and we'll get into some scenarios of where this is useful when you're dealing with people who don't have encryption, don't know anything about encryption, but need to be protected. And that would be journalists, for example. All right, let me get back to... All right, the next scenario I want to show you, whoops. Okay, when you purchase a Startmail account, it's $5 a month, it's $59.95 a year, and when you purchase an account, you get one account for you and two companion accounts to give to your friends, because there's no use having PGP encryption without having people to write to. So we give you two accounts, so you can give them to your business colleagues, your spouse, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, whoever, and immediately once you get your email account and they set up their Startmail account, you can begin sending one another PGP encrypted email, which has the benefit of being real email. It lands in their real Startmail inbox. We have IMAP, so you can bring it into your Thunderbird or your Outlook or whatever you're using, and it enables you immediately, within like 5 minutes of setting up the account, to begin 3 people writing extremely secure email amongst one another. And if you buy 2 accounts, it's 6 people who can do that. So Startmail account holders can automatically email one another. If I were to write an email to my colleague Sally, who was kind enough to come out here with me today, you would see that it's automatic. Even though I just created this trial account, if I put in sally@startmail.com, it's going to automatically PGP encrypt that email to her. Second scenario is if someone is not using Startmail, but they have PGP, and we've all met these kind of people, they're security people, hopefully you've got PGP, Courtney, out there, and other people do, then you can simply take their key and import it into Startmail and begin writing to them that way. So the other person doesn't have to be on Startmail for you to use PGP encryption. All right, tax return we talked about. Domestic abuse organizations, this is a really great example for nonprofits and groups that need to be protected and may not have the ability to protect themselves. So my good friend Cindy Southworth with the National Network to End Domestic Violence right here in DC has actually had me out to speak about the technology that abusers use in order to go after their victims. They tend to be very technologically savvy. They do things like put bugs in their cars and tracking devices, and they tend to hack into their victims' email accounts. So one problem you have is if you are a domestic abuse counseling center and you receive a phone call, a frantic phone call from a woman crying, and you want to send her some really important information, maybe tips on how to stay safe, directions to your office, legal resources, you need to be able to send that and transmit that to her through email, but you don't want to use her Hotmail or Gmail account because it may not be secure. So you can do what I just did with Courtney. You can on the phone say, you have a little random word generator or a little book, you turn to a page, you go, okay, your password is going to be butterfly. And I'm going to send you some email, and you're going to click the link, you're going to enter that, it's going to self-destruct after a day, so you need to get it right away, print it out, and then delete it, and don't have it on your computer, and then you can communicate. And then that gives her the ability to write back to me. So she can then say, I'm not safe, I had to run away, I'm at this location, and nobody else can see it. This actually came up. I had a privacy law professor approach me at a conference and say, this is great. I teach privacy law. I have 30 students in my class, and I have a mailing list, but they're all on Gmail and Yahoo. And so everything I send out about the private discussions that we have in class is going into the hands of those companies. Is there a way I can use Startmail to write to all of them? And we said, yes. What you can do is up on the whiteboard, when on the first day of class, you say, my name is Professor so-and-so, and the password for this class is LegalStar, and I'm going to be sending you email, and this is the password you want. And then you can load in all 30 email addresses, send to all of them whatever email that you're going to send. They all get the link, and they have to type in EagleStar. And you can use that for the duration of the semester. They can send in their papers to you privately, even though they have Gmail and Yahoo accounts, and you can grade them and get back to them privately. Civil rights, civil liberties groups, this would be journalists, this would be Amnesty International, this would be all sorts of groups. If someone is contacting you from a very dangerous location, Startmail gives you the ability to give them simply a password, and you establish that correspondence back and forth, as I've been describing. And then that's really important that you set the messages to self-destruct, because that means even if under torture they reveal the password, there's nothing to get. It's literally gone. All right, so features: send private email to anyone, Startmail user or not. One-click PGP encryption, what I dreamed of back in 2000. We never read your email. Our business model, people said no one would be willing to pay for email. I believe otherwise. I think people actually will pay for email because there's no such thing as a free lunch. And once people understand that, it's literally pennies a day. And we never read your email because we answer to you. You're our customers. If you want to know who a business answers to, look at who pays their checks. Look at who pays their bills. So in the case of Google, it's marketers. So they're always going to put the marketer's interests above yours. Based in Europe, home of strict privacy laws and regulations. We're hoping to keep it that way, and appreciate everybody's help in fighting for encryption. And it's built by the folks behind Startpage and Ixquick. If you're still using Google for your search engine, we're saying Google it. That's not a verb. It's a multinational, heavy privacy invading company. Start saying Startpage it, or just look it up. But we need to stop saying Google it. All right, and here's the pricing. One personal account and 2 companion accounts, $59.95 or €49.95 a year. There's a coupon code you can use, a promo code 2015, which is good till the end of the year to get you $5 off. So if you want to get an account, and if you'd like an account for yourself, just contact myself or my colleague Sally, and we'll be happy to issue you an account. And that's it.
Thank you very, very much. That's exactly what the doctor ordered. Any questions? Oh, good. Yep. Let's ladies first.
I have a question. Are you Courtney Radsch? You just heard me talk. I guess my question is: are you working with organizations, journalists, activists, HRDs to provide free accounts for those who either? Because a lot of countries also you can't buy things online. They don't have working credit cards, et cetera.
Right. So one of the things that our next step, we're going to be at the N10 Nonprofit Technology Conference in March, and we're going to be debuting sort of our latest feature, which is the ability to host domains. We don't currently have that. So if you want to be so-and-so at cpj.org, you're not going to be able to do that until March, but then you will. And so we would be in a position to issue you accounts. And I would say if there's anybody out there who has a nonprofit organization or is a journalist at risk or someone else in particular need, talk to us.
So, Roger Cochetti, really the same question I asked before. We here in this room, most of us, are stuck in the U.S. policy debate, and without any doubt, the first issue that it would be interesting to hear you respond to is that this is a made-to-order solution for every bad person you could imagine, terrorists, pedophiles, that this was made to order for them. So I'd like to hear your response to that, since that clearly will be sort of floating around any discussions about this. And then secondly, if I could ask the opposite, the exact opposite question, as incredible as it may sound, it would be interesting to hear your response, and that is, well, this is actually a honeypot which was created to attract people so that they can be secretly monitored by the French Secret Service or the American, or some cabal, whatever conspiracy theory would drive it. But if you could respond to both
Sure.
critiques, that would be
Happy to.
helpful.
So the concern that I have about the assumption that every communication that people have amongst themselves has to be open to third-party surveillance is really problematic. When I check into the Holiday Inn, I could see somebody making the argument, well, wait a minute, she could go behind closed doors, lock the door in the Holiday Inn, and who knows what she's doing in that room. So if you start going down that road, if you say that every communication between two people has to be monitored by the government, then we're talking about cameras in our bedrooms, we're talking about cameras in Holiday Inns, we're talking about implants with microphones to literally listen to our conversations in the woods. So I think we hit a point where communicating with other people privately is not a crime. Going for a walk in the woods with my husband and having a conversation that no one else can hear is not a crime. So until someone has actual evidence and reason under the U.S. Constitution and the laws of Europe and elsewhere to actually say we have reason to suspect this particular individual of a crime, our system of jurisprudence says that you cannot just go rifling around through people's stuff. So that's very problematic. Now, in the case of Startmail, we are not subject to U.S. jurisdiction. PRISM, FISA courts, NSA has no power over us whatsoever. So if the U.S. government wanted to get access to a particular individual's account, they would have to go to Europe. They would have to work with the European courts and the courts in the Netherlands. We will respond to a valid court order with actual evidence and probable cause. We will respond to those. We've had no reason to do that. In the 15 years that we've been in existence as Startpage and Ixquick, we have never once responded to a government request. So in answer to your second question, I guess that is the answer. We've been around for 15 years. We are the first company to receive the Europris Privacy Award. That's the European government, which took 6 months to absolutely grill us over, roast us over coals and look through everything we do. We have received their highest standards of rating over 15 years, and it's built by the same family-owned company and small group of people that built that. So we're in it because we love it. We're not making a fortune off of it. We hope people will get on board, but we're doing this because we believe in it. Yeah.
So I have three that I hope are quick. So it looks like you solved the receiver, the question of the receiver having a client or not having a client set up for PGP
Right.
by having that, I guess, basically a web server just running SSL.
Correct.
For their user to click and see what their
Correct.
message is. So one thing about that makes me kind of wonder is I hope that a lot of us in InfoSec have successfully trained at least some end users to think, if I just see this email this link in an email, it's probably not a good idea for me to click it because it's probably a phishing attempt.
That's a really good point.
You know,
so your Startmail account, the one thing that is revealed to Gmail is who it comes from. So if it says Katherine Albrecht, KMA@startmail.com has sent you a private email, and presumably you and I have had some communication and you know who I am, then you can look at the headers if you want. You can
Right.
make sure that it really does legitimately come from me. But it doesn't just say, here's a random email from who knows who, click it to find out. It actually tells you the email address from who it's from.
Okay. And then how do you handle this? So you did say that you support IMAP. How do you handle the client installation part of IMAP there? Like, I mean, you have to do, do you have some kind of script or something that you run to do
Poor
something?
Sally, she's over there. Sally is our VP of operations who heads up support, and that's one of our key questions, that we get a lot of questions on support. We have videos. We have a support center that we spent several years building, and I've been in the nitty-gritty of it. We have answers to hundreds, or we up to thousands now of questions. It's extensive. Because we're a search engine, we've actually made our support searchable in a good way, and we had to build a lot of stuff onto products to make that happen. So we guide you through it, and the IMAP installation is what it is. I mean, we've got multiple steps for how to do it, but you got to follow the steps. So we advise, if you're not technically savvy, find somebody who is and have them help you.
And then what answer would I give to people who ask, well, really, what are the practical downsides to having Google indexing my data? Like, the worst that I ever see.
Ask Ed Snowden.
Well, yeah, but like, the worst that I, as a quote mere mortal unquote, ever see is that, well, it looks like Google is reading my email and targeting ads to me, and honestly, I don't care.
Right.
You know, and then there's the last thing was, this is, I guess, just a product development question. Like, one of the big things about Google Apps is that you've got a whole suite of stuff that integrates with your mail account. Are you guys planning on rolling out some companion product, like, I don't know, a branded version of OwnCloud or something like that, that would go along with Startmail so that you've got that whole sort of like suite of stuff?
Okay, so what was your question before that?
The first one was just what do I tell somebody when they ask me what are the practical downsides
so
of Google?
The problem with privacy invasion is it's tasteless, odorless, colorless. You don't know what's happening. And I keep dreaming of the day that someday somebody actually gets a hold of that Encyclopedia Britannica from Google and is able to actually expose to the world just how much they know on a particular individual, no matter who that is. It's going to be a lot. We do know from Ed Snowden that governments no longer go for, I don't know, the Interpol satellite to find information. They now go for Google and Facebook. They go to the places where they know that they have more information than the government does. Google knows more about us than our own moms. I mean, my mom doesn't read all my email. She doesn't know all the things I search for. So Google knows more about the average person than their closest associates. And that's a real problem. So it's a problem because even in China, when they hacked into, we think it was the Chinese military, hacked into Gmail and in order to identify dissidents and literally put them away into labor camps. And who knows what else they did. That's because Google was the target. You want to hack Google, not your local fishmonger. You know, I mean, Google it's got the bulging data. And if they really cared about our privacy, they wouldn't be collecting this much information because it puts us at risk. Whether they're the risk or not remains to be seen. I have to ask myself, why did they buy Boston Dynamics, and why do they have Big Dog Robotics and you know, military robots that can hunt people down? I don't know. But if you trust Google, then you have to ask, why are you guys putting me at risk by making a bulging bunch of information for governments to hack and go after? And your last question was?
Sorry, it was just about, like I said, just kind of a product development question. Like, I run OwnCloud at home.
Where we go next?
Right, and so just because I don't want to be bothered with a lot of what you just talked about.
So I guess the good news is we went from a search engine to email, which was for a small company, a massive undertaking. We thought we could just add privacy onto Squirrel Mail. And after 6 months of trying that, we scrapped it and had to build the whole thing from scratch, zeros and ones from the ground up. So I would love to be able to tell you, yeah, we got 50 plans, but every one of them turns out to be a lot of work. And do people know the American embassy in the Soviet Union was actually, they built it, and then they found out that they had actually put microphones into the pillars and dug stuff underground? Well, that's really what we found out, is that when you're building a privacy product, and fortunately for us, Ed Snowden's revelations came out when we were still in development, so we were able to incorporate a lot of his insights. But when you're building it, you've got to make sure that you actually dig 50 feet underground and put some lead down there before you go laying your foundation. So we were able to build all that in, but it's huge. I mean, what you see on the surface is a tiny little top of the iceberg of how much development effort went into this. So I'd love to talk to you if you've got ideas. I would love to do start page DNS, you know, start DNS. I think DNS servers are one of the biggest privacy holes we have. Anybody else?
Yeah, you just touched on something there at the end, which sparked a whole different question that I had in my mind, but I'm just going to focus on what I wanted to ask. Maybe I'll talk to you afterwards about your Start DNS stuff. So I'm Jim Galvin from Affiliates Technologies again. I'm a security technologist, and what's interesting to me when thinking about security, and now we've had 2 presentations about the importance of privacy, anonymity, and we're applying security technologies to these things. Security is a risk management problem.
Right.
And one of the things that always concerns me when we talk about these kinds of things is where are sometimes the vulnerabilities and the risks can be subtle because they're downstream or they're, you know, second or third order kinds of problems. And I was struck in this particular case when I think about key management problems and your solution for how do I get someone who is not part of Startmail and be able to provide them with an encrypted email message and do all of that. So while I have no doubts about what you did and the choices that you made and what you're doing there, what does strike me is you become dependent on HTTPS. So you become dependent on secure HTTP, you're dependent on the browser, and you're dependent on SSL and TLS in that context, which all of which sounds great, and we all think that that's great. But we've also seen a lot of risks associated with certification authorities and the issuance of those certificates, which means you've now inherited a certain second-order risk about how well the browser and that certification authority are dealing with their certificate in issuing to your certificate for what you're doing. And I'm just wondering, more generally, what are your thoughts about moving past that and how you would deal with that? And I'll give you part of my bias here now as you think about this. This goes back to the question I asked before in key management. It's all a question of what you want to trust. And in particular, DNSSEC and DANE provide solutions to get away from your certification authority model and provide a different kind of trust model. In particular, you end up being dependent only on the DNS and the DNS root key. And then you actually control your own key relationships past that, except for that one key, which is not true in the CA model. You end up with this hierarchy of dependence and other third parties like your browser and such. So I kind of put a lot out there, but it's really about how do you feel about those second and third order risks, and do you really emphasize those, and are you thinking about them, and what are you going to do down the road?
If you want to use, bear in mind, there are a lot of 10-year-olds out there who probably should not be writing unencrypted email even to their grandmas. I mean, really, nobody should be writing unencrypted email. So we wanted to make Startmail as easy to use, and it's at least better than having everything you write hanging out there in the breeze. If you want to take Startmail to its ultimate endpoint, you would probably install Enigmail, manage your own keys, and only correspond with other people through actual PGP that they're managing through Enigmail and managing their own keys. I mean, so we provide the gamut. If you're a 9-year-old and you have no clue and you're just clicking encrypt this message, then you're encrypted. If you're not encrypting your messages, you're at least not having them read, which is what's happening with Google. I've had a lot of people say, I have a Gmail account, but I use Enigmail and PGP, so what's the problem? Well, you're only using that for 1/10 of your messages. What about the other 90%? All your newsletters that come in, Google's perusing them and reading them all. So at least with Startmail, even if you never use encryption, you're 100% times better because we're never looking at anything that you write or anything that you send or receive. All right?
Thank you very, very much. Any more questions? Thank you.
Switch over to, thank you
Much
so
appreciated.
Much.
Quite.
Thank you.
I just hope that it's one more step in actually getting these things done, because I'm one of the persons who actually uses a Gmail account and since about 18 months tells himself, I have to change, I have to change, I have to change. I think it's time now to do it. Otherwise, I'm losing credibility here. Christian Dawson. Christian Dawson was a founder of Safe Hosting Initiative, designed to galvanize web hosting providers in matters of public policy, and is currently chairman and co-founder of the Internet Infrastructure Coalition. He is a staunch advocate for Internet freedom as a tool for social economic growth by fostering the growth and expansion of the Internet infrastructure industry. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
The floor is yours.
I appreciate it. It's going to take me just 1 second to make sure that this presentation comes up. And once we are up, I want to warn you that at the end I will have questions for you. So we're going to flip the script a little bit. So as you are watching, think about how you might be able to help what it is we're doing. I thank Pathfinder Project for allowing me to come up here and talk to you all today. I'm very excited that my group, the Internet Infrastructure Coalition, has the opportunity to work with them to figure out how we are going to try and build pathways to teach nonprofits, to work with them in order to figure out how to give them the tools necessary to maintain privacy and security. And it's a tough role. One of the reasons that I'm excited about doing that is that my organization, the Internet Infrastructure Coalition, we are the people that build the Internet's infrastructure. We represent web hosting providers and registries and registrars, cloud infrastructure providers and data centers, the people that build sort of the nuts and bolts of the Internet. And I feel like we have a responsibility as the people who build these technologies to teach people how to use them. My own background, I ran a cloud company for about 16 years. In that capacity, I've worked with a number of people, a number of different organizations, many of them nonprofits, to try to teach them how they can deal with their own security issues. And a lot of times we need to get down to the basics. What I mean by basics is a little bit like what Jim was saying before, managing and managing risk. If you want true network security, unplug all your computers from the internet. Everything else is an exercise in managing risk. And so that's what we're talking about here today, to figure out what true basics are. David Vjorst and I actually started having this conversation about 6 weeks ago or so, when we were listening to very complex talks about all sorts of new encryption techniques and technologies and all sorts of tools that were going to revolutionize security. And I turned to David and I said, you know what the big problem is that, like, there are different operators and organizations, and it gets right down to the end user. Sometimes the end user is never going to touch any of these really complex tools. They're just going to end up doing something stupid that opens them up to risk, and they don't understand that they're even opening themselves and the networks that they're dealing with up to risk. So as we figure out how we're going to have this dialogue with these nonprofit organizations, we have to take a look at the fact that we need to have dialogues with different people at different levels. We're talking about engaging network admins. We're talking about engaging web admins. We're talking about engaging the employees within organizations and then the people that interface with those organizations. And each one has a different risk profile. And more importantly, each one has a different way that they need to be engaged. Like I said, I've been working in tech for a long time, and a lot of the major technological issues that I saw pop up are because people would do things like, hey, my email's broken, please fix it, here's my password. They send me that email. So, well, yeah, I mean, this is pretty typical. And somebody doesn't know that they're not supposed to just go ahead and send a password in plain text. In fact, probably a lot of us in this room, including myself, have done it. And we've probably gotten away with it, but we won't always get away with it. Or, I just logged into my web server for the first time since 2012. It says I have 231 updates. Should I run them? Or more likely, your server's been rooted. Nobody's updated it since 2012. So when we're taking a look at how we're going to deal with engaging these organizations, we need to take a look at what the basics are. So we take a look at all the people that we need to engage with. We realize that each of these people at each level needs their own sort of operational profile. And at each level, these people have different aptitudes. For each, we sort of need an outreach strategy because people don't listen. I don't listen and I don't pay attention. That's what I generally get. When I send out security updates to my customers, when I talk to them, when I say, hey, make sure you don't do this, make sure you don't do that, generally, they'll do it. And then they'll get back to me and they'll say, hey, you didn't tell me. And I'll point to an email that I sent them like 6 months ago. I'll say, oh, I wasn't supposed to read that, was I? Yeah. So we need to figure out how we're going to, we are going to engage at all these different levels. The goal number one is to build systems that don't need to worry about employees and users. And the second goal is to assume that you've failed at that and to work to train people to use the internet safely. For that, we need to start by building sets of shared definitions. And then we have to figure out how to explain those definitions at every single level. It's really difficult at the employee and end user level because you've got varying aptitudes. Luckily, when you're dealing with employees of nonprofits, you've got a high opportunity to engage. You can start training programs and you can figure out how you can sit them down and teach them various things. It's much tougher to do that to an end user. Like I said, you send them an email and you explain them the basics, they're not going to read it. So figuring out how to get across the basics of a security protocol and teaching them to employees around standard definitions is very important. Figuring out how to broach that with end users is an even more difficult challenge, and one that is something that we are going to talk about in a little workshop format afterwards to figure out how we can get people to actually listen to things once we've generated the right curriculum. But we can't assume that these top two that I've got grayed out are people that we don't need to work with and engage as well, because at the network admin level, you've got drastically varying aptitudes as well. In fact, most of these organizations are small to medium-sized businesses. I have dealt with web hosting providers who have told, who I have watched go to their users and say, hey, I need to work on your computer, send me your root password, and they've done it over email. Lots of these web hosting companies, literally web hosting companies, are 2-3-man shops that are reselling space, and they don't know any better. And so as you're building a curriculum of what you need to work with nonprofit organizations, you need to take a look at what raw infrastructure partners you have and what protocols they have and what their aptitude is to figure out if you're making smart decisions along the way that manage and mitigate your risk. When you're dealing with the web admin, it's the same thing. A lot of those people are small to medium businesses, or they're sole proprietors, or they're hobbyists. And it's not that that's a bad thing. In fact, the internet's driven by these small to medium businesses or these hobbyists that are doing incredible things and building incredible technology. But as you're building a way to manage and mitigate risk for your nonprofit, you need to check every single way along the way. What are my protocols for dealing at the administrative level with my network, at the web level, with my employees and my end users, and not take anything for granted. Just because somebody's an organization doesn't mean you need to play by their protocols and their rules. The way that we lay out a pathway for security engagement for a network, for a nonprofit, has got to take nothing for granted and has got to mitigate and manage risk at every level, at every step along the way. So what we're planning on building, we've got some core definitions that we're going to be working on, and we're building different risk profiles for different operators at different level. And basically different explainers, just really clear language descriptions of some do's and don'ts, starting with as simple as, like, don't send your email don't send your password over an encrypted email, straight up to how to engage in PGP encryption, and how to make sure that your network tools are cataloged and updated on a regular basis. The big next question that I've got for this group, and maybe we can workshop it a little bit, is what else do we need to do to get us on a pathway to generating a curriculum that's going to be effective for a nonprofit audience? And once we have that curriculum, how do we get people at every stage along that way to listen to us? So now it's workshop time.
Thank you very, very much. And I think I really would like to answer your last question.
Good.
Because in Pathfinder and with GKPF, we did some research. And one of the things which even shocked me as somebody who was working in that area, 60% of the NGOs we checked out in Europe lost their domain name in the first 3 years of their existence for various reasons. And the two things come into mind. It's quite simply, it's a question of relevance. A lot of users and NGOs and so on are not, for them, what we are talking about at the moment is not relevant. It is relevant the moment things go wrong.
Right.
And what we need to find on all levels to find a language that is relevant to the people we want to actually reach. And the other thing is, I think it's also we had a discussion in Pathfinder in Singapore, I think over a year ago. And Samna Franco, who most of you know, simply made a little speech about 15 minutes, why it is important for an NGO to have a domain name and be in the DNS and not use social media. And it was impressive. And I was always thinking about, look, if people who are hosting domains, selling domains, and so on, actually could get the message right and saying how important that is and how advantageous it is for the user. There's a huge market. We don't even need new top-level domains. We just need to sell the ones we actually have already. So this is my workshop idea. Sorry.
Good ideas.
Okay. I'd say, so for the what else do we need, I would put a bullet point for an army of volunteers, because it's one thing to make materials and to make a cool YouTube video and to create, you sort of reference what I think are 1 or 2 pagers. But some former colleagues of mine from New America Foundation, we created an evening class, and we taught it as part of Knowledge Commons DC, which is a great free and open school if people haven't heard about it. Just a short plug for them. And our class was actually titled Basics of Online Security, and we talked about don't send emails in the clear, what HTTP is versus HTTPS, and a lot of the themes that have been sort of talked about this afternoon. And what was so important about that was creating a space for a conversation, not just materials to chuck at people, but to have a conversation that could be guided by how people were feeling in the room, and that we would actually then stay later, after the class was even over, people had more personalized questions or wanted to help us or ask our advice for their personalized sort of questions or issues or concerns that they had. So, I mean, it's it's incredibly important to have those materials ready, but then to not assume that those materials will then just magically be utilized, but to really emphasize like a human volunteer interaction component, and that's something that I really care personally about, not just these points, but then the actual, in-person conversational guidance.
I have found in my own experience, I've given a number of different classes and generated a number of different materials in the past geared towards a nonprofit audience on these technical issues, and I've found that when you can look somebody in the eye, and when you can explain it, okay, I can see that we're not having the breakthrough, let's explain it a different way, It really does take that personal touch to really get that and connect with people, and then it makes all the difference. Yeah. I agree with you completely.
I just would like, also give an answer from the Pathfinder side to you. Normally the format of these events is that we have 3 presentations, then food is served, and people can go to another room and sit around table, what we call thematic tables, as long as they like and talk. We didn't manage this time because of space reasons, but this is, for example, goes a little bit in your direction, that people then really can deepen things and follow them up. On the other hand, it's also a question of time. Who finds 3, 4, 5 hours in an afternoon or an evening to spend on this? So, sorry, James, that I interrupted you. Yep.
So, my name is Jim.
No, please.
So my name is Tim Galvin from Phileas Technologies, and when you talk about what else do we need, I think what I would do is turn that back into a question to you, where I would suggest being careful about the target audience. Be specific about who your target audience is. I see the word users up there, and in your presentation you talked about end users. And a little bit of context I want to bring into what I want to say. It was a little over 2 years ago that Bruce Schneier in particular started this particular phrase where he said, I think it's time, we don't need one-click security anymore, we need zero-click security, right? That's the way it should work. So the observation that I make in general in this issue of security is all about risk management is you cannot depend on the end user. Okay, you have to assume that they're going to do the wrong thing, that they don't know what the right thing to do is, and more importantly, you did say in your description of end users about low opportunity to engage, you have to assume you can't reach the end users. Okay? The assumption here is that end users assume it works and it's the right thing. And the only end users who don't assume that it works are for those for whom it really is critical and essential. Getting back to the last couple of presentations where we talk about journalists in particular who have this need for anonymity or protection and privacy. Okay, people who know that they have that need are more likely to want to be educated and look into it. So I think your desire to want to create resources for organizations, I'm thinking that organizations really are kind of end users. Your target audience is really the service providers. You need for them to be doing it right because users assume it's done right. They just figure that everything is supposed to be protected and everything's going to be secure. They don't have a sense that they have a concern here. And so the ability to outreach in person or even establish benefit, even if you establish the benefit, you've got no way to get it to them because they're not interested in pulling it. You can't push it to them either. So, thank you.
I will say that I actually completely agree with you. The So the meat of the work on a project like this is going to be spent on trying to educate the nonprofit on how to deal with the service provider level of security. And the presentation was focused on making sure that we take a holistic view that actually goes beyond that to check off the other boxes and look at the risk profile at every level. Now, when you get down to the user level, you may find that you've got a strategy that has protected you to the level that, maybe the way that you deal with your user level security levels, just to support the APWG, Anti-Phishing Working Group, and what they do to make sure that even that the risk profile of dealing with end users is completely taken care of. Other than that, but to ignore, I want to make sure that everybody sort of checks every box, even if you get to the point where you narrow the need for that last box as much as you humanly can.
Hi there. My name is Mark Noel, and I'm from 501c Tech, and we are a nonprofit managed services provider. So I actually have conversations like this on a daily basis. It is actually my job to sit here and have these conversations with executive directors, et cetera, IT directors from all different sizes of nonprofits. And this is something that we work on in similar ways. Some of the suggestions that you've given, we do like a monthly happy hour with N10. We organize that and have workshops where we have people come in, do talks. We have that kind of dialogue and conversation afterwards. And having a mix of different people in the room has usually been very helpful, because you have maybe some consultants over here, or a brand new nonprofit that's 2 people, or somebody who's a big church or something like that over here. So that having that mix of people in the room to have those discussions is very helpful. But getting back to, I think, down up to like the more strategic problem, I think, is adoption. It's really getting down to getting these organization leaders to adopt and make it a priority financially to adopt more secure means, because that's what it always comes down to. And that's even if it's just having workstations that are not up to date, people running XP, people running Microsoft's Server 2008, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just kind of getting them to even understand that those basic things are important, I think, is the biggest barrier to entry. And that psychology, this sort of battered IT syndrome, if you will, where they've grown up from the get-go, from where they've been 2 people, 3 people, 5 people. Now they're 50 people, but they're all used to, we don't have the money for that. We don't buy new computers every 4 years. We don't, we just got to deal with what we can here. And that psychology carries as the organizations scale, and that's a psychology I think is endemic in the nonprofit community. So that financial case, I usually find the point that I find gets a lot of traction is, what are you going to do if you lose all your financial data and you get audited? That makes EDs and CFOs stop in their tracks and shut up with their excuses about why they they want to take home the tape drive every day. And they will argue with you till their face is blue about why that's okay. And so that, I think, focusing on financial data security is a big way to get at them, and then also on business continuity. So if they're losing their backups or they have a bad backup system, that's kind of your angle in the door to get people talking about security and get them in the concepts, because these people a lot of times just don't have the background. So that's kind of my input.
That's great.
Okay, thanks.
Fantastic.
I have a question to you, and to you, Christian and James. I'm responsible for implementing Pathfinder and listening, especially what James said, but also what you said. Is there anything which we could do in Pathfinder to organize an event, for example, between registrars, service provider, and the user community, to have more dialogue going on in that front? And for example, one of the key elements of what we will try to do is that the emphasis there, I really like that conversation today and everything what happened here, but we didn't have enough real NGOs here. And what we have to do now is to go to the NGO networks and get them to go to the members that we have next time we meet here in January, at least 20, 30 real NGOs on the ground and find out what's going on there. That's the trick, and that's what is one of the lessons learned. In some area, it works much better in others. For example, Latin America, to get NGOs together in a room and so on, absolutely no problem. In DC, quite a problem. But we will learn and we think. So my question to you both, what would be the most valuable contribution Pathfinder could make, in your opinion, to get the dialogue going or whatever?
I don't have many insights, unfortunately, on how to pull NGOs together. I will say that I2 Coalition would be happy to work with you to try and find a location and time and place to try and do something. And it may be smart to try and do it around DC, but it may also be smart to try and look to dovetail alongside some other sort of cloud event that's happening elsewhere. But we can take a look at calendars and see what we can do.
So thank you, Klaus, Jim Galvin, for that lovely question. What can Pathfinder do? You know, I think that going back to the comment that I made earlier about being specific about your target audience, you know, and so I interpret your question to be, how do we get at our target audience in general? How do you get at your target audience, and how do we make all of this stuff useful for the target audience, which is NGOs and civil society in general? So how do you get them to one of these meetings? And I think that, you know, that really is the problem. You know, we can build solutions, we can provide tools, you can provide centralized locations perhaps for those tools and a way to get them. But will they pull those tools towards them and make use of them? And how do you educate them to have that interest in wanting to go for those tools? You're fundamentally, it's problematic fundamentally in order to push tools at people. Because if they're out busy doing their thing, we're talking about small organizations, right? 2 to 3 people, you know, maybe a few more. They don't have any free cycles and free opportunity to go take advantage of the training and the tools that even you're putting up. So, I mean, how do you push stuff towards them? How do you get to them? There's only so many of these kinds of meetings you can run, right? I mean, in theory, you want to run them around the world so that you can get to where the NGOs are doing their work. So it's very little burden on them to come listen to you and learn about the tools so they can think about pulling them. So I really don't have an answer to your question. I mean, I think that is the fundamental problem. You got to start somewhere. Here is a thing. I mean, doing it here in this location is one possibility, but you're reaching a certain kind of NGO and civil society. You know, that's the other problem you run into. Your market is dependent on the location that you have the meetings. So I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't know, but you know, I'm acknowledging that it's a very problematic question how to reach your target audience, and there are a lot of reasons why that's hard. Thanks.
What I'd really quickly like to do.
So the comment from the floor, for those who are listening to the stream, I'm sorry, I have to repeat this, was, so how about Google Apps?
What I'd like to do, if possible, is really quickly just do a quick overview of the things that I'll take back and process as we figure out how we're going to take the next steps in collaborating with Pathfinder, and that's that we need to figure out how to break the cycle of relevance, where security is only relevant when things go wrong. How do we establish benefit to users? How do we get an army of volunteers to focus on training and outreach in person? How do we acknowledge that the goal should be to not rely on the end user to do the right thing? How can we build a financial case for security adoption? And probably most importantly, and what we spent the most time talking about, is to really know your target audience so we can develop relevance to them.
Not only know, but connect with.
And connect with. Okay.
Wonderful.
So thank you.
That was absolutely great. I've been reminded of the time, so I would like to stop it here. First of all, thank you to all the 3 excellent speakers. And I just hope that this is a little contribution and the start of something. And to come back to what James said about he might not have the answer. I think nobody at the moment has a complete answer, but we have to try and we have to